Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts Ariana and Seth.
This is the Pop Cult Podcast. I'm Seth.
I'm Ariana.
And this is the beginning of April, which means we're beginning a new series all April, all 4 episodes. We will be reviewing movies from 1995. Why did we pick 1995? I asked Ariana, hey, what year from the 90s do you want to watch movies from?
I said 1995 because...
I've been trying to go through, because I'm a nerd, on Letterboxd. I already have kind of done my favorite films of the 2000s and the 2010s. So now I'm kind of working my way backwards. And I thought, there's lots of good movies from the 90s I didn't see because I was a kid then. So I wasn't really watching more adult movies from that time. And I have seen some of them. And so for this episode, we'll be talking about Matthew Kassovitz' La Haine. But before we get to that movie, we'll be starting with Todd Solondz' Welcome to the Dollhouse, which is a movie I think a larger than expected number of people are probably familiar with. If it came out now, this movie would be lost in all of the indie movies that just get churned out every week on iTunes movies. But because it came out in 1995, it was able to get a little more prominence. And I even was aware of it when it came out in 95, working at the public library, because I would look through issues of Time or Newsweek, and they'd have little entertainment sections. This movie won Sundance Awards and things like that.
Yeah.
So if you aren't familiar with Welcome to the Dollhouse, it is a film about Dawn, played by Heather Matarazzo. She is a middle schooler who is just kind of going through a series of horrific situations while she lives I think she lives in Long Island or possibly the New Jersey suburbs. I can't remember.
Yeah, it's close enough.
It's those places, right? It's not New York City. It's not Newark. It's the suburbs on the East Coast, with the kind of people that would talk about how great Trump is. And so her life is just a series of hellish moments. And then the movie just kind of ends. Mm-hmm. So, Ariana, what did you think of Welcome to the Dollhouse? It's a movie we've both seen in the past.
Yes.
So this was a revisit for us.
Yeah. I have recalled that I watched this film probably multiple times at a time that maybe I was a little bit too young to be watching it.
Or maybe the perfect age to be watching.
It is a film in where, basically, Dawn is bullied because she's ugly. She's bullied because
it's made very clear that's why.
Pretty, and she doesn't. I mean, it's not to say if we don't really know what type of personality Dawn has, because it shifts and changes depending on where she's at. At school, she tries to come off very docile, very soft-spoken, doesn't know how to defend herself. But at home, she repeats all the bullying that occurs to her and tries to use it against her little sister Missy, who is just unfazed by it.
Oh yeah, exactly. Dawn is this perfect example of an ultimately powerless person who is just a reactionary. They're just raging against the world and making no headway. They're not making a dent in anybody's life or day.
I think about a lot of films that are a coming of age, and you always had that one oddball adult that would speak some truth or give them some advice or give them a little bit of hope about growing up.
Well, the adults in the world of Todd Solondz are completely feckless.
Yeah.
They can't do anything. They're unaware of what's going on.
Unaware, and it's also this obvious thing. It's Dawn is going through something that none of us are going to talk about, because Dawn is too much of a coward to talk to anybody of what's occurring, and when she tries to,
she just gets dismissed.
He gets dismissed or punished. One of her bullies is copying on her during class.
We have Brandon, who's the key bully in the movie,
and the teacher ends up punishing both of them at the same time. Because
it's Dawn doesn't get the grade she expected because she was so busy being nervous about the kid copying her, and then she complains about the grade, and her teacher goes, have some dignity. She's so mad at her for just she goes, grade grubbing is just so pathetic. Yeah. And then makes her write an essay on dignity, which she then makes her read to the entire class.
Yeah, it is it can be at so many times brutal, and at the same time you're just sort of you can't really blame Dawn for this, but it's also this weird thing of watching it now as an adult, she can't comprehend the idea of telling an adult to find a solution. She can't, like, she goes to her older brother with questions, but her older brother is so consumed with academia and his future that he doesn't turn around to ask her, like, hey, why are you asking this?
Well, I'd go even further. I would say this is a movie where everyone is angry.
Yeah.
And they're not really sure exactly who they're angry at, so they just end up being angry at everyone around them.
Yeah.
And it's, to me, it's a very brutally uncompromising vision of American suburbia, where Solins is basically stating that in the real world, there are no good guys or bad guys. Everyone is probably a bad guy, just to a different person.
Yeah.
Because with the Dawn character, like you were exactly right, that everything that's done to her, she then brings home.
Yeah.
But she takes it to a level that seems seriously more concerning than the other people. She is threatened with weapons. Like Brandon pulls out a knife. He threatens to rape her at certain points.
Yeah.
But the way he says it, I mean, he's also like, what, a 12, 13-year-old boy, that when he's saying it, as an audience member, you're also like, I don't even think this kid understands what that means.
Like,
because he keeps threatening to do it, but never goes through with it. But then it's like and then it becomes like their boyfriend and girlfriend at a certain point, which is so fucked up.
Like, and that, the funny thing is, like, I remember watching it as a kid and being like, oh my god, she has a boyfriend, like, because it's like, I'm a kid, I don't understand what's going on. And then as an adult, you're like, that is not the boy that you need to be.
But then it's like, you think about the way young women are conditioned in America to accept these like toxic, date rapey punks as like suitable mates.
Like, it's also like a talk that nobody really has a deep conversation about until lately, where when you are deemed unattractive, you don't get the catcalling that everyone else experiences. You don't get the unsolicited, like, flirting, and that almost at times when you're like when you're deemed unattractive, you wish for that, like, attention, even if it's not good, just because it feels like then you're not fully experiencing womanhood at its totality, right? So you just accept whatever's given to you.
Well, it's a movie that doesn't rose color the emerging sexuality of adolescence.
Yeah.
It is a movie that is like, no, sexuality in, 12, 13-year-olds is a horrific experience for them.
But it's also like her thing with sexuality and her thing about having these crushes has nothing to do with actually wanting to be in them. It is this idea that is an escape. This person will take her away. Like, she makes a little shrine
to Steve,
like her brother's bandmate, that is only there because it's like,
when the film clearly tells us is a pedophile. Like, he's a high school student who looks like a grown man, but frequently fucks children. Like, not on camera, of course, but like Dawn meets up with exes of his. And like, I love what Solins does is he never tries to hide that these are children.
Yeah.
He doesn't cast older actors. He clearly wants you to go, this is what, like, and he's not even presenting this as like, it's a comedy, it's a dark comedy, but it's also a very accurate picture of things.
There's a girl called Ginger that, like, is supposed to be either the same grade or a grade above her, who has hooked up with him. And Ginger is kind of like telling Dawn, you don't got it for him to be into you. Like, you don't. And she's like, what do you mean? And she's like, you know what I mean.
She's not a child that looks like a little woman, which is what's going on.
Like, Steve is constantly making lyrics with little girl in it.
Well, and then one of the jokes, because it is a dark comedy, is you eventually realize, oh, he's more attracted to Missy, the 9-year-old, 8 or 9-year-old, like, because that's where there's some like weird sexual tension near the end of the movie when he's still hanging around. Like, I kind of got those vibes from it, and that Dawn has mistaken what, like, he kind of humors Dawn, but it's clear he's not interested in Dawn. He's bored.
He likes the attention.
Yes.
Like, it's boredom, and he likes the attention that he gets. With Missy, I don't know if there was, but it was also sort of like,
I think that Solins was making undertones of that. He was kind of hinting.
Like this understanding, since Missy is like a beautiful child.
She's like a supermodel kid.
Like that other people only want her around because like she is deemed what like you want out of beauty out of a child. Like she's in a little tutu all the time dancing, and like she's beloved by everyone to the point that she gets kidnapped by one of the neighbors. And
yeah, that whole like thing where I love the way he sets that up, because there's I forget the event. It was wedding anniversary, right? Because then Mark, the oldest son's band, performs there, and they're going back and they're watching the videotape. And there's this quick shot where one of the neighbors, he just keeps picking up Missy and playing with her. And none of the adults really comment on anything to them, like, oh, isn't that nice? And then it turns out that's the neighbor who kidnaps her and takes her to, I think, like New York City or like.
No, he doesn't take her.
He just keeps her in his house.
He keeps her in his house in a secret compartment.
Yes.
And so like
that's what it was.
Dawn asks, like, did he do anything to her? And like the brother's like, I don't think he did. But I think she liked it better there because she had control of the clicker, meaning the control.
Yeah, moral control.
And then she got to pick whatever she wanted, and he gave her McDonald's whenever she wanted an ice cream. And like during the short interview, like the television, like they asked like Missy, did he touch you? And she says, I don't know.
So it's left very vague.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I mean, I wouldn't put it past this guy to do it. He's like a man who will kidnap a child. And like the fact that he had a secret compartment in his house.
Like he'd been planning it.
There's no further discussion about that to me, which after you see these real life stories of, women who were kidnapped and held in like dungeons in the Midwest for like 10 years, it's sort of, no, people who do this don't do it once. If they get away with it once, they just keep doing it again and again.
And it's, the whole movie, it's like her parents don't really pay much attention to Dawn, but again, she's really like, it's also because it's just showing you, because the parents are bad communicators, Dawn is a bad communicator.
Oh yeah, it's like, a movie that you could basically call the movie Punching Down.
Yeah,
because like it's a movie about hierarchy, and it's a movie about how that entire hierarchy is centered around one person punching the person beneath them who has less power than them, all the way from like the teachers and the school administration to parents and then siblings and everything.
The clear sign that like Dawn has no power in this family is, so her parents are going to have their 20th like anniversary, and like Dawn's mom was like, we're going to celebrate in the backyard. We're going to need you to like break down the shed. Like the little place that she has to hang out with her friends.
It's not even like a full shed. It's just like a bunch of like lumber and shit that's been nailed together.
Like a set player there, and like she meets up with her friend Ralphie there
for the special friends club.
Yes,
which is, it's like, it's so childish and so sweet. But then in the context of this movie and the way other characters react when she goes, we're part of the special people's club. And then I think I forget who it is that tells her.
That tells
he goes, you do know what like the word special means. That, and like he said, it means the R word, right? And Dawn, like, that never passed through her mind, which also speaks to like the innocence of this character and how she's just being rotten by these people.
It's also like the abuse that she endures. Also, she puts it on Ralphie.
Yeah,
she puts it on like undeserving people in some way or another. And then like how the mom requests, I need you to put down the shed. Dawn refuses. She says that's the last thing. And so the mom then asks like Missy and the Mark, the brother, like to help her do it. And then she brings out this cake, withholding the cake from Dawn, not telling her.
Oh, it's so childish.
It's like this unspoken thing. And Missy's proudly proclaiming at the fact that, like I picked it out and Dawn's watching them eat.
Well,
only for Missy to go,
yes.
Hey, Mom, since Dawn isn't going to eat hers, can me and Mark share it? Pretty please. And
then the way Mark is eating his cake, like how Solins directed these actors is just so great, because Mark is just eating this cake like a pig. He's just shoving it in his mouth. He's talking with his mouth full. There's just this like mindless hunger for more cake
Yeah, it's not. They're not sitting down savoring.
Yeah,
it.
no one's enjoying the cake. They're just scarfing it down.
They're scarfing it down with bits and pieces to just be like the aftertaste being it. And Dawn has to watch this as her mother divides the cake, basically letting Dawn know, no, your shred's coming down, whether you like it or not. Your brother and sister are going to help me do this. And by the way, you have to watch it eat the fucking cake.
Yeah, it's just endless cruelty.
And it just shows you that Dawn is completely at the bottom when it comes between like her two other siblings.
Well, then there's Dawn's potential sociopathy, where there are a few occasions where Dawn contemplates straight up murdering Missy, like standing over her with a ball peen hammer and like
cutting the heads off her dolls.
Well, thinking about like she could just take this hammer and cave her sister's skull in, and you're like, something is certainly wrong with Dawn.
But this is also like this fantasy of like saving her sister once her sister's kidnapped. There's no acknowledgement that Dawn was gone the whole night. In fact, Dawn doesn't really experience like much danger when she's in New York because again, it's supposed to solidify in her head. Dawn is ugly, so no.
She's too ugly for even like a child molester to go after her, which is, I mean, that's typical Solins, right? That's the kind of fucked up joke he likes to make is you're so ugly, even a child molester wouldn't come after you.
Like a lot of times child molesters will go with the kid that gets the least amount of attention.
Yeah.
But he's just showing like how it is like probably feeling as if he was unattractive. That's how he felt at that time.
Clearly he's present in Mark and he's present in Dawn and the experiences that they're having.
And I think it's what's interesting.
And like and Solins is also like if you see him, you're gonna go, wow, that is not a traditionally attractive man.
Yeah, and like what I thought was interesting that also creates this divide of like we are watching this purely through Dawn's eyes is that we hear a conversation in the background of the mom having about Dawn. And she's actually like being like celebrating Dawn, but it's again, family has poor communication. Mom doesn't tell Dawn this stuff. So she's telling her, it's like, oh no, Dawn's part of the like hummingbirds. They're going to go to Disney World. What child doesn't want to go to Disney World? She is so like, her mom was like, she's so lucky. And you know what? She's always been very musical. Like we hear the mom talking about her.
Then think about the final scene of the movie where we zoom in on her on that bus going to Disney World for this trip.
Yeah.
And all the audio cuts out except for Heather Matarazzo's singing. And it's not the greatest singing in the world, but it's not bad. Like it's clearly she's singing with her heart.
Yes.
And I also want to point out like this movie is carried on that like 12-year-old's back. And she is incredible.
She's so good. Like she's directed so well and she did so well that it's sort of like I understand why she kind of went into retirement because again, she was not conveniently attractive. And like she's now like on TikTok talking about roles that people really love. Like she was in the Princess Diary films. That
she did a lot of playing the best friend and things.
Yeah, and so she talks about how she'd admire the character from Princess Diary, that there's things about her that she realizes as an adult now. She appreciates having played them, but it's like she's directed so well because like one of the best examples is Dawn goes to that girl Ginger who had hooked up with Steve sometime in the past after her brother gave her this information, and her brother's basically like, Steve will fuck anything. Like he's listing off girls and he's like asking Dawn, is she attractive or not? And Dawn is trying to be like, well, maybe she's not very pretty. And he's like, is she pretty or not? And then like it's like
he's reinforcing to her like how ugly his own sister is. So he's just like, yeah, another person heaping on this cruelty. But then we also get a little background on him where he talks about how nothing gets better in high school. People just talk behind your back instead of in front of you.
He's like, yeah, it's like middle school is better. Like high school is better because like they'll make fun of you, but not in your face. Yeah. But going back to the Ginger thing, Ginger like is making out with a guy. Another guy's kind of watching.
Another like fucked up situation where they're clearly much older than the character.
And they're like telling her not to move. And like she comes over and you just see the stark differences between them because Dawn is wearing this floral dress. Like her strap of her backpack is not even. She's got those huge little ball things.
Well, she has those shorts that girls would wear in the 90s that were like pulled up to their waist,
Yeah,
but then
but
with
this
almost
is-
not quite a skirt, but almost a
yeah, but
skirt.
it's
Yeah.
like this is like she was wearing a floral dress, and then like
Ginger's wearing like
Ginger-
what Olivia Newton-John wore at the end of Grease or something,
she's
like that kind of
wearing a
outfit.
midriff, colorful top, shorts, and she talks to Don, and she's like, "Who told you about me and Steve?" It's like, "Oh, my brother. Oh, he's the king of the nerds."
Yeah.
And it's
Even a middle schooler knows he's the king of the nerds.
And I think it's all like it is either she just entered high school kind of thing because she
Yeah.
knows him, and it's just like this Dawn is just so like she just so many times she's so little, and he's also so smart, like the director, about like the sexuality thing, because Ginger says we just finger fucked one time,
And Dawn has no and the scene
No
the scene where Dawn, like, she's at home and you see her like moving her fingers into different positions and you can tell she has no idea what that
has
even
no
means.
idea.
Like, how would you fuck a finger? That's what she's thinking.
Scene, it's her playing the piano. Steve shows up, and she's like, "Oh, I can play the piano for you. Do you want to look at my fingers?" And he's like, "Okay." And she's just like, "Oh, I can't play the piano very well because I sprained them." And it's smart in where he doesn't put like this actress in a sexual position that's uncomfortable to watch. Is it like, and you also don't know what she did. We don't know if she did something sexual or not.
I think she just was contorting her fingers and sprained them. That's what
and
because he is able to maintain her innocence for the character while making sure the audience knows how fucked up this is.
Yeah, it's like her whole relationship with the bully who like they make out. They're just
I mean,
like,
they barely, I mean, I don't even call it making out.
Yeah,
they don't
and
know
it's
what they're
just,
doing.
like it is this thing of it being like he wants to be her boyfriend, and she tells him in a very dramatic way of it being like, "We can't be boyfriend and girlfriend. I'm in love with someone else." He's like, "Who is it? Who is it? Who is it?"
He says, "I'll fucking kill him."
She's like, "No, he's older. You don't know him."
It's children like play acting what they've seen on television or seen dysfunctional adults do.
And it's like, and then you find out that like he has a like dysfunctional household.
He has a brother who has Down syndrome. And then that like other people at school are calling Brandon the R word. And you start to think like, oh, I think he does have an intellectual disability. But he compensates for that by just being the most nasty person and so mean to everyone. And then there's also Cookie, the female bully at the school.
Oh, yeah.
Who that I part of me doesn't feel like that character goes anywhere all the way, but she does have one of the most memorable scenes in the fucking movie.
Oh yeah, the beginning.
Dawn in the bathroom,
and
saying, "You came in here to take a shit," and Dawn being like, "I didn't know. I came to wash my hands." And then how she makes Dawn go in the stall and then stands there and goes, "Don't flush. I want to see it." It's so awful.
It's awful, but it's also like Dawn doesn't have enough of that wit to be like, "You want to watch me do what?"
Yeah.
Like she could have easily buffered it, but she's so even nice. She's just like awkward and like scared.
But even Cookie was awkward because what they're doing is Cookie is awkwardly reenacting the kind of cruelty that's probably been meted out on her or she's seen be done to other people. And so she's trying to position herself in this hierarchy as a top dog. And that means brutalizing other people. And so that's why whenever she does it, like I understand why she's doing it, but her delivery feels stiff and not like she's pretending to be someone else.
She's pretending to be tough, but like the acting is so
it's
well
good.
done.
Yeah, it's good
with them that it doesn't feel like
it feels like real little kids.
Like it doesn't feel like a child actor playing a bully. It just feels like a kid that adopted this tough personality, and it's like that intermixing of you are who you are from a very young age, but now we're going to watch people mimic what they want to be.
Now, one thing I want to ask is, was thinking about this, and I thought if this movie was made now, one of the things that would be changed is that Dawn and Mark would not be presented in such a negative light. They would be redeemable in some way because they're the ones being bullied. And nowadays, when you look at a lot of American cinema, when bullying is presented, the victims of bullying are always undeserving of it. not that Mark and Dawn deserve it, but like you rarely ever see victims of bullying in popular media now in America punch down, right?
Yeah.
It's more like, oh no, I'm really sad that I'm bullying and I get depression, and like that's the worst thing that happens to them, and they don't really go further with it. And it's one of those things where I was thinking about how I think like last year or a couple years ago, we went through and did the best of Saturday Night Live.
Mm-hmm.
And when we got to around this time period, like 1995, which was the period where I was really watching SNL a lot, you know, that's teenage years. And I didn't notice it at the time because, you know, once again, as much as people use it as a pejorative, it's not. I wasn't woke at the time when I was 14, right? I wasn't aware of other people's suffering. But then when we went back and watched those SNL episodes, I noticed how homophobic and transphobic so many of the jokes were.
Yeah.
That it was to an absurd degree of how cruel it was. And there's this double-edged sword where, like, yeah, you could get away with saying those things in 1995, but also Todd Solondz could get away with making this movie in 1995 because it was this kind of, well, if they're going to be so cruel and nasty over there with that comedy, well, then I'm going to do my brand of cruel and nasty over here, and you can't really come over and say anything about it because I'm just going to go, well, look at the shit that, you know, the popular kids are quoting in school. Like, I'm just pointing out that people are mean. And the thing that does make me sad about now is I don't think a movie like Welcome to the Dollhouse could be made.
No, because at some term, either she gets like a weird makeover or it's going to be like she breaks down crying and the mom hugs her.
It would be
like,
too lesson oriented.
Yeah.
Where somebody learns something and grows rather than like, no, life just fucking sucks for if you're a kid.
like that, this film does not have a quirky adult that gives inspiration.
Yeah, every adult is worthless.
It's like every adult is like so focused on their own thing that they're kind of like middle school and high school aren't a big deal. And it's also like this funny thing is like we get peaks in, for example, in Mark's life where he has a long distance girlfriend that he met like during
the letter.
Who basically indicates to him like she's serious about the opportunity of like having sex, but it reads as if he doesn't want to have
nervous.
That he's nervous. So she's kind of like, if we're not going to have sex, and it's also like this amazing thing that this girl has like what nowadays people strive for when it comes to healthy relationship with
communication
and a daughter. It's clear communication. Versus then it was supposed to be like laughable and cringy because she's like, I've spoken to my mother about having sex. She says that I should try to have sex before I like go to college or even get married, that it's important for me to experience a healthy sex life. And so if you don't want to have sex with me, then we need to break up because I'm like,
this is something I want to experience.
Yeah.
And so versus Mark, whose parents know nothing about him. They don't.
No, his parents are like.
Well, they wouldn't know about this.
No, they wouldn't know about this. They know that Mark is like.
He's in a band. He's a nerd.
Well, they're so kind of like happy at the fact that he's so obsessed about having a good resume for college.
Because he mentions the band. He's purely doing it so he can put it on his application for college.
For like recreational stuff.
And so he doesn't even care about the music that much.
No, and it's like this amusing thing that he's playing
it's like a klezmer. It's like a Jewish instrument, and it doesn't match any of the other instruments, and so their music has this very interesting sound, but it's not a sound that's ever going to be like super popular. So it's sort of, if he's trying to make a band in order to rise up this sort of hierarchy of popularity, well, this isn't going to do it. And he only gets Steve to join the band because he's basically doing Steve's homework for him. Like it's, I'm helping him out on this. But it is more like he's probably just doing the work for him. And so, it's, once again, that's another place where Solondz is pointing out just even, he's kind of criticizing people like himself. Because I'm sure Mark, I think there's a lot of parallels there. That like, even someone like me does things just because I want to be seen in a certain way by the society I live in, not because I have a passion or genuinely care.
Yeah.
And so it's, I mean, if you've never seen a Todd Solondz movie, I think this is a good one to start with because it is his first big feature debut.
It is his first
I
one,
wouldn't
and
start with
it's
Happiness,
so well. I
but
think
Happiness is my favorite Todd
this
Solondz
is like the
movie.
easiest one to swallow between all of them,
Yeah.
to be honest. Like, and then there's Wiener Dog that has
There's
a continuation of this character.
The anthology storytelling, which I don't
Yeah.
know if you've seen. I think Kieran Culkin is in that.
Yeah, we saw it together.
And it's its own thing, but like the thematic connections with all of Solond's movies are that typical white suburban Americans are living miserable lives and don't seem to care about doing anything about it. They're just in the misery. And I don't know if you've ever seen Palindromes.
I don't think so.
Which Palindromes, I want to say, yeah, because there's bigger gaps now between his movies, because like Wiener Dog, I think was like 2012 or something.
Yeah.
And he hasn't, I'm not aware that he's made anything since. But like before that, you had Palindromes, which is a movie about a teenage girl who becomes pregnant. But during the movie, she's played by 8 different actresses, including it's the actress from Fast Times at Ridgemont High, the blonde.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and then also played by a black, I think she's maybe a black young woman or teenager who is like over 200 pounds, but then also like a super skinny, pale redhead girl. But it's the same character, and no one ever comments on it as that changes. And it's very experimental and very weird, but that's kind of what you get with Solondz is he has no interest in just plainly showing you these people. He is going to add this veneer of like absurdity over it all, where it's slightly heightened, but not to the point that it becomes unreal. It still feels like disturbingly real.
Yeah.
Well, La Haine is a movie that I've heard about for many years. I've seen little clips from it, but I just never sat down and watched it until now. And I know it's a movie you've never seen before either.
Nope.
Right? You probably hadn't heard about it until I turned it on.
No, I mean, I think I've seen clips of
like
it when
TikTok
it was,
and stuff.
like not TikTok, about like YouTube's when you've done like best scenes or something.
So it is a 1995 French film. The premise of the film is after a youth is tortured by the police, a riot explodes on the streets of Paris. Vince, played by Vincent Cassel, Saeed, played by Saeed, I'm going to try to pronounce his name, Taghmaoui, maybe? And Hubert, played by Hubert Koundé, so everybody uses their real name, find a gun lost by the police in the riots and threaten to kill a cop if their friend dies, which is not really the plot of the movie. That's like a tiny piece of the movie, but that's kind of the official synopsis. Ariana, I have an important question. I'm going to him like David Lynch. There's a wind and a tree. That's what he would say. And then you can't see I'm moving my hands the way David Lynch. So, Ariana, what did you think of La Haine?
I was pleasantly surprised by it.
So much that you gave it a 5-star review on Letterboxd.
I think it's just a lot of times whenever we've watched films that include Black people,
they're props.
They're props. It's because I mean, I don't want to end up talking about what Five Devils, whatever the fuck we end up watching.
You can check out popcult.blog if you want to read my review on the Five Devils and the way it handled race.
But it's just a lot of times with European countries, I'm very speculative. But this was
very suspicious.
Yes. But this was one that actually did not disappoint me, and I came to wonder, like, because all these characters are carrying their actual actor's name, made me wonder if it was more a collaborative sense of what was going on.
I wouldn't be surprised because the director Matthew Cassio-Vet was fairly young when he made the movie. Audiences would probably know him best as I can think of 2 roles that he was in. He was the love interest in Amelie, the photo booth repairman that she pursues. He's also the guy who tries to rob Bruce Willis at the beginning of The Fifth Element. Oh. The junkie guy, that's him. So he was probably in his 20s or 30s. Let me see. He's 55 years old now. So in 1995, he wasn't that old. And so, but he was just a very ambitious filmmaker. Yeah. Like insanely ambitious.
And so this is a film that, for anybody who is very familiar with early Spike Lee, I would say.
I was thinking Do the Right Thing would make a great double feature.
which is funny because I've never seen that film, but I just know a lot about it.
Yeah, it's one of those. Yeah, I have never seen the whole thing.
And
I've seen
the
lots of
thing
scenes.
is, like, it made a lot of sense to me having grown up in 1995 and being kind of like starting to become more and more aware about race, especially because I lived in a very diversive, like, in the projects basically, like during that time. Or was it like a little bit younger? But it had that feel about it. Like
There's a constant tension.
Not even it wasn't so much the tension, it was just like visually about how
It's very kind of crumbling, dirty.
yeah,
It's
like,
hard to keep your neighborhood clean because no one in power is trying to.
well, it's like this weird thing that for an outsider they would consider dirty. For me, it was
normal.
just normal and fascinating. And
Very crowded, very packed.
exactly.
Everybody has to like try to get along with each other because there's no other option.
But
like,
there's like outside things that are gonna come in and like fuck up with that. And so thankfully there's not really like a lot of exposition to explain what's going on. You pick up the pieces of what's going on through the movie.
Well, there's a great like opening newscast that is a prologue, essentially.
Yeah.
It tells us that this guy Abdel was arrested. He was tortured by the police to the point that he's now in a coma in the hospital, and that last night there was a massive riot in the neighborhood he was from, and police clashed with the locals, and one of the policemen lost his gun. And that's kind of all you need to know when the movie starts. And it's not about the riot that happened, it's about the morning after the riot and the fallout of all of that.
Yeah, and it's sort of like, it's also this understanding that the riot isn't going to be completely over. There's still a lot of anger that's going through. So we just see these three young men kind of like going through like France,
just Paris,
going through different scenarios, going through different like emotional states. Herbert is like the one that has like, it seems like he's the most rational between them.
He's grounded.
Yeah. He's more grounded, and there is a point that like when he's not with his friends, that I think he's talking to his mother, who's a seamstress, who's asking him like, hey, when are you gonna get this machine fixed? The other one's working, but this one isn't. And there's a remark where he believes that Vince is the reason that like the gym set on fire. And I don't know, I didn't get quite clear, was the gym his or was it just someplace they would go to?
I don't think it was Hubert's. I think maybe Hubert used it frequently. It clearly seemed to be a place that the men in the community met regularly. It was like a social club for them.
Yeah. And we kind of see some aspects of their life. I don't recall if we ever saw like Saeed's family or home.
I think we get some glimpses of that, yeah.
But not too much.
I don't feel like Vin's, do we really get any?
We do.
We do? Okay, yeah.
Like he comes from a Jewish family.
Oh, yeah, no, because when we meet him, he's at home, and yeah,
and he's like having making a Robert De Niro impression, which is like, I think that's a scene that I've seen a lot, but it was so well done.
Oh yeah, I want to talk about that. Cassie Yvette is such a clever filmmaker because he introduces Vin's by having Vin's do "Are you talking to me?" into the mirror. And what he is saying, it's so clear to me, is Western society can only communicate through its pop culture. That's like the core way that people have identities, is they attach themselves to larger than life figures and then pathetically try to emulate them and often suffer the consequences of that. Because he's pointing, it's something that's always frustrating me about Taxi Driver, is in the discourse about that movie, you have people who love it, and they love it because they connect with Travis Bickle, which is scary. And then you have people that malign the movie because they have this weird assumption that if a movie presents an objectionable character, the movie is then endorsing that character by default.
Yeah. And
they don't understand how the other elements of filmmaking comment on Travis Bickle in that movie. But Cassie Yvette's smart. He knows, I know all of that because I'm making movies, and I know that Travis Bickle's not a good guy. And we kind of see that in the way Vince's story plays out. But he goes, but to someone like Vince, Bickle is this icon of masculinity, right? He's a guy that people shit on, and he's not going to take it anymore. And so for Vince, who only is viewing his world on this surface level because no one's ever really taught him how to go farther than that. No one's taught anybody in this neighborhood to go farther than that. He's like, no, I'm going to be like that guy, and I'm not going to let anyone fuck with me. And the whole movie is, I saw a perfect description of it, that the movie is one long game of Russian roulette. And you're constantly getting to these tension moments, and then the trigger gets pulled and nothing happens. And then the tension builds again to another moment where the metaphorical trigger gets pulled and nothing happens, like it doesn't explode. But the whole thing is, when you play Russian roulette, you know inevitably at some point you're going to pull the trigger and someone's going to die.
Yeah.
And the whole movie is just waiting for that moment to happen as you're kind of moving at this breakneck speed of, you're just like, at some point, one of these people is going to get fucking killed. Like, I don't see how, like, they're getting so caught up in like the emotions of the moment, and they're right because they should be angry about this shit, but they have no effective way of doing anything about what's happening to them or their friends. So we know they're going to cross a line.
Yeah, but especially because Vince is talking with Saeed, and at some point he's like, well, we really need to do something about the cops coming, like, they're coming into our communities, they're attacking us, and that's just not fair. And Saeed is kind of like, us? And he's like, yeah, I'm one of you guys.
Mm-hmm.
And like Saeed's like, you're white. Like, it's like he doesn't say it, but it's also
it's
like,
clear, like, yeah, you're Jewish, but they don't know that when they look at you.
Yeah, and he's like, no, but I grew up here. This is my place. And it's just sort of like, you love, and like throughout the whole film, there are points that with each and every character you can love and hate them.
Oh yeah,
because, and it becomes a very interesting thing because you think they're just gonna fall into the stereotype until something breaks away that you're just like, okay, I can't really disregard this person. Like Hubert, who's like angry and keeps telling all of them like, well, not all police are bad. We need to stop with this idea. And then Saeed at some point like goes into jail with Vince, I think, gets pulled out because like a fellow
there's a guy from their neighborhood who's a cop who's looking out for him, and he knows Saeed's brother.
Yeah.
And he's sort of like, stay out of trouble, Saeed.
And Saeed is sort of like angry because he's just sort of like, I don't want a fucking pig to let me out. I don't care if you're brown like me. You're a traitor.
Yeah.
And like you start to understand like
it's destroying his solidarity with his community by getting released when other people aren't.
Yeah, and it's sort of like you understand, especially after everything that's occurred like in Nashville recently, you understand where Saeed is coming from, where he's sort of like, yeah, he should maybe feel grateful that he was pulled out of prison because he could have gotten his ass beat by the other cops, but he's also angry at the idea like that it had to be like a fellow brown person to let him out, that person had to participate in the police system. And then there's Herbert who's like, no, you should be really grateful, it's fine. And then they go through this whole thing of trying to get back like some money that Saeed is owed, which becomes this whole other thing.
Yeah, there's so many subplots in this movie. And it's like, only an hour and 30 minutes long. It like goes by so fast.
Like had left them on their own, and then the guilt that he feels going through it, and then him also realizing that his friends keep him grounded when he starts hanging out with two other people.
But he's still so
violence explodes with them.
He's still so concerned with like, because he's going to prison. He's been arrested for something previously. He was found guilty, and sort of the date where he's going to have to turn himself in is coming up.
Yeah.
And he's worried about what's going to happen to him in prison. And he's convinced himself and other people, not his close friends, but other people around him, have kind of hinted at him, well, if you kill a cop and you go in as a cop killer, you'll have automatic respect and that will protect you. But Hubert is sort of, do not do this. It will make your sentence longer. You will become a bigger target than you already are because they don't really notice you that much anyway. But if you kill a fucking cop, it's even if you get out, like you're fucked.
So is it Vince or Saeed that's talking to someone at some point going like, it's cool. If I go to jail, that gives me a rep. I'll be just like you. And the guy's like, I've never done a day.
I think that's, Saeed talking to Vince, because Vince, once again, remember, he's playing Travis Bickle from Taxi Driver. So he's trying to exude this energy from him that he's tough, but he hasn't really, other than living in a poor neighborhood and being poor, he hasn't experienced that level of brutality.
it was a conversation with a black person.
Yeah.
And the guy was like, kind of like, no, I've never done jail. Like, they kind of, it's this interesting thing that I feel like in an American film, they would have had said like, no, yeah, that's going to give you cred. I thought it was much more interesting that it was kind of like they're looking at him like, I've never been to prison. Why would I endorse that?
Yeah, like, don't do that.
Like, and it's not as if they're not without those people who, if you did go to prison, it'd be fine. It's like he kind of like disregards the fact that like his, like at the least Vince disregards that like his grandmother is concerned about him and doesn't want him going out. That's not that's dangerous for him. He disregards Hubert, who believes that Vince is the guy that burnt down like the gym, because he's sort of like, of course he would do that. I would probably be in the gym instead of hanging out with them right now. I would be like working out, like hanging out with my other friends, but now I'm stuck with them trying to make sure that they're, you know, they don't fuck each other over. And then Saeed is like tumbling between them, not knowing what direction to go to exactly. They end up going into a building where everybody hangs out that's like deemed like dangerous. He sees his sister there hanging out with friends. Mm-hmm. And he's like, get the fuck out of here. It's dangerous. But it's also like he's being a hypocrite because he's gone there to hang out. And then she starts flirting with Vince. And he's like, get the fuck out. Yeah. He gets even further angry because he's sort of like telling his sister, don't fucking flirt with him. And so she's kind of like, he's your friend. So it's like Saeed doesn't wants this reputation of a badass. However, he doesn't want his sister involved with that. It is, I mean, even though it was an hour and a half, there's so much going. It is dense.
And it's a film that I think the core theme of it is focused on violence and the idea that violence is a permanent fixture in everyday life. Now, the extent to which you directly experience that violence varies depending on your economic class. These characters experience a high level of violence on a daily basis, either the threat of it or like the direct impact of it. And so that's why they have to assume these personas, because it's a shield. If you are puff your chest up enough, you might intimidate the bigger guy from coming over and beating the shit out of you. But if you're someone, you know, like I can say our life, we don't experience this level of violence on a daily basis. We can go outside and not worry about like getting involved in, you know, gang violence or anything. That's just not going to happen. And it's twofold in, you know, where you choose to live, where you choose to go. Because also, like, I know of places in the Netherlands that we could go, and the chances that we would see that violence is going to increase. Like if we go to Rotterdam or something, your chance of seeing violence, if you're out late at night, you're going to see more violence. But for these people, where they live is where this is happening. So there really isn't an escape for them. In the movie, they escape from the violence a little bit by going to nicer neighborhoods in Paris, but then ultimately get harassed by the police, who are like, you don't belong here. You need to go back in the hole where all the violence happened.
Yeah, and it's also is like they go to a nicer part in Paris, and they stop to ask directions, and what happens is the cop ends up answering him, and Satan is like, damn, even police people are nicer over here.
Yeah. They note that in the movie. It's just like, oh, the cops are friendly in the nice neighborhoods. That's interesting.
And it's only until they end up like disturbing the quiet peace that rich people like are so feel entitled to, is like when they're told to leave.
It's also a stunningly beautiful movie.
It is like gorgeous
for a movie that's so much about violence and all of this. Cassie Yvette does such a good job of stopping the movie at certain points and just luxuriating in the beauty of a scene. That I think of The DJ, where he's in this high-rise tenement and he's got his window open and there's people playing like outside in the park playing basketball.
Like,
or whatever.
The way he shifts over,
he's got his speakers pointed at the window, and he's just being a DJ, and he's getting so much joy from this. That he's able to do what he loves. He's sharing it with the people in his community.
But it's also like it's part of the riots because it's like he's playing fuck the police.
Yeah. And so it's still like it's finding, even though you have to live in this hellhole, you're still going to find beauty in it somewhere,
Yeah.
even if that's really hard. But and even the beauty can comment on the horrible things.
Well, it's also like this weird thing of like when we talk about violence, growing up in the projects, I never really felt any fear up until the point that like I was supposed to hit my womanhood. Like if I lived nearby any places, it's sort of like, oh, now you are a target.
Now there's predators stalking you.
And it's also like that interesting thing that like you were saying a while back when you used to teach at a school that was walking distance from a project and you would just walk the kids back home.
Yeah.
Like there was no sense of danger because they all understood you're there to protect the kids. So we're just gonna like salute you and be happy that you're around. It is the fact that like because the police came in, that peace that they had was interrupted because they were being harassed, because they were just being like tumbled over.
And yeah, I think that's the important thing. The perception of police isn't the same for everyone. Right now in Nashville, there's a lot of fervor to applaud the 2 police officers who showed up and shot the murderer, right? And I'm gonna say I'm glad the murderer is dead. I think that murderer caused far more suffering than simply killing those 6 people, because that murderer was identified as a trans person. They've now given kind of carte blanche for the trans community to be targeted en masse, right? Like that's going to happen. And yeah, it's good that the shooter is dead, but that doesn't mean I'm going to start bootlicking cops, because you're now having people who they talk about the gun control part of it. And I understand why they want gun control, and that makes sense. Here in the Netherlands, they have gun control, and I think since 1999, there have been 2 school shootings in the entire country, and only one of those shootings killed anyone, and it was a single person. So that's a pretty good track record for that, right? But there's this thing that nobody is addressing as they're talking about gun control is the people who will enforce the gun control are the cops. And it just seems like American memories are very short term, because it seems like, it was just a few years ago that we were watching coast to coast police riots in America as people were rightfully protesting this sort of extrajudicial murder of Black people in the country. And a lot of people like to frame that as, oh, the protesters were rioting. No, it was the police that were rioting. They were becoming violent with protesters who were fairly expressing their rage, and oftentimes would escalate. The police were the ones escalating things and driving it to that sort of destructive riot level.
Yeah.
And so I can't endorse gun control in America unless it comes with the unilateral disarmament of all police in the country. And I know that's never going to happen. And so therefore, gun control is off the table for me. Not like it really matters, because I don't think anyone who understands politics in America realistically thinks gun control is ever coming anytime soon. I mean, if you want to get high off of opium, you can. I understand. You want to believe that things can change. But I just think Americans don't understand something that the French do, which is the origins of political power, the dynamics of how it works, and how to effectively wield political power, which does, under that umbrella, include violence in the form of self-defense.
Yeah.
And in America, it is a nation of bootlickers, man. They love to say they support the troops. They love to say they back the blue. And the people who don't are in the minority in America. It's just a fact. It's a fact of life. And so when we talk about urban places, we also need to take into effect that, like, what's going on in La Haine, parts of it can be translated to the United States, but parts of it can't.
No.
Because there's some fundamental root concepts that differ in that the people, there's a historical record of people becoming violent in acts of self-defense in France and achieving something with that, right?
Yeah.
In America, that history is very muddied. And while those acts of violent self-defense are there, we don't really talk about it in an accurate way. It's just pushed as like, oh, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, nonviolence. If you don't return the punch, they will be ashamed and then everything will work out. And the thing that I like about La Haine is it ends on about the most down note you could possibly imagine, where it is just this is all hurtling towards a moment of oblivion. Now things will survive, right? It's not complete annihilation, but it's a moment of such incendiary mass destruction that very little will be left in the wake of it. Mm-hmm. There will be something, and the question is, what will we do, those of us who make it? I don't think I will, if it comes to that. Like, I don't think I'm making it. Those of you who do make it, what are you going to do with those scraps that are left over? Are you going to recreate what was and simply go through all of this again? Or are you going to understand what it takes to fight to make it better?
Yeah.
And the characters in La Haine, even though we can love them, we can disagree with them, they're ultimately as reactionary as the police. There's not coherent thought. Even Hubert, who seems to be the voice of reason throughout the movie, when they come across the skinheads, that reason goes away, and he's justified. Fuck skinheads. Like, if you want to be a Nazi, good. You're going to get what you get. But like, his whole argument to Vince about, don't do this, don't do that, you're going to make it worse for yourself, it goes out the window because Hubert is just, this motherfucker wants to see me dead, so the best thing I can do is kill him first, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And then the very end of the movie, which I won't say what happens, Hubert becomes submerged in the violence in a way that he's just never going to escape it.
Yeah.
It's just, that's like, it's a very realistic ending. Like,
well, I think these are like a lot. This film obviously influenced films that are supposed to be dedicated to one night of experiences that are like very rapid. And in American settings, it feels as if they've never fulfilled what they would want to do compared to La Haine, because there's a lot of things that you can talk about it. We can talk about the like colonialism that like France has impended on like African.
Well, yeah, because most of these characters are there because France colonized their
like,
ancestors' home countries,
and therefore like made it possible for them to maybe immigrate, or is it sort of like, I know the language, I can just go there.
Well, it's safer in the imperial core than it is on the fringes.
Well, like how I've always told you, they have like, the problem is a lot of times people end up running into the arms of their suppressors because it's safe.
Well, they've made those homelands so uninhabitable and so exploitative that you're like, well, if I go to the capital of the empire, they'll still exploit me, but it'll be slightly less worse than it is if I stay in, Senegal or Algeria.
I mean, like, yeah, and then it's just like this like, it becomes such a film that you can't take your eyes off of it, and it's one of those rare treats. It's black and white film,
and that's perfect. This movie color would have ruined it
because it just, the lighting and the coloring on even the black skin tones, the brown skin tones, are so well done in comparison to the way that like American cinema does not do well.
Washed out and muddy. Unless it's Barry Jenkins.
That's who I was thinking.
Barry Jenkins photographs black people in American film better than any other director I've ever seen.
Knows what he's doing. Yeah. Like, kisses to him, flowers to
and
him.
So it speaks to the sensitivity of this filmmaker that he is a white Frenchman. I think he might have a Jewish background.
Yeah.
But that he took the time with his cinematographer to light these black people in a way that brought out their beauty. Like I said before, it's a movie. I mean, the title of the movie translates to hate in English. Yeah. So it's a movie called Hate. Yet, like I said, there's these profound explosions of human beauty throughout the movie that remind you life is not all violence and hate. That's not everything.
And there is a point in the film that, like, again, these aren't supposed to be exactly teenagers, but you kind of remember how young they are.
20-something. Yeah.
20-something is they're kind of waiting for the train, and they end up sitting in like in front of a mural with a ton of televisions, and they're just sitting there kind of like kids watching a huge television. Like, you're planted there, you have nowhere else to go. They're leaning against each other at times that often look bored. So you kind of just think to yourself, like, these are just young people in the middle of this, and that's so unfair.
They're emotionally children.
Only to then find out that their friend has died in the hospital.
Yes, yeah.
And like the ironies of it later on, like you don't really realize until you get the whole kind of like story is their anger of like before when they visit their friends was sort of like, why are the police protecting him? You caused this.
Yeah, like we're gonna protect him. You can't. You're the ones that put him in this coma.
And they're like, no, you need to leave, and they get kicked out because of the sort of the ruckus that they make. And it is forgetting at times that when you are at such a young age and you don't feel like you have any protectors, your assumption is then you will take guard and do that. But with so much anger and not so little thought, it's not going to be done correctly, and there's going to be consequences to suffer, and they're already suffering the consequences. Like Hubert doesn't have his gym. Saeed has already lost a friend who looks, that looks like him.
Yeah, they both have the same ethnic background.
And then like Vince, who is on the sentence of maybe going to prison and is probably having this feeling, and there's also like Hubert and like Saeed don't tell Vince to his face like, you are not like us, but you can feel it.
Yeah.
They're like on a train right after like Vince finally finds them, but they're not sitting together.
Mm-hmm.
They're not buddy because it's like they had to endure like the police brutality, that even though Vince got like hurt, but it wasn't to the degree that they got hurt. And like the brutality of it, like it's an uncomfortable scene of watching these two men being brutalized by the police with a junior police officer sitting there watching in disgust.
But doing nothing.
But him knowing if he does something, he's screwed.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like, so you don't know, does he just like, he's probably just accepting that this is his fate and he's going to become them.
Well, and that's the thing is like when everybody talks about, oh, no, those were just bad cops. The thing is, the institution of police is inherently bad when you look at the origins of it. So anyone that is a quote unquote good cop would quit.
Yeah.
Because you would see that this institution is so monolithic and beyond the ability to be reformed in any honest, genuine, meaningful way. The only thing you can do is quit as a form of protest and try to protect the communities that the police brutalize.
Yeah, and it's like, it is a difficult scene to watch because they're so manhandled, they're verbally abused. It gets to the point that the cops are making like sexual innuendos towards them as a way of mockery. And you don't really know, like Saeed starts responding back to them almost like in a flirtatious manner, but it's more like he's doing it to protect himself. And Hubert is not speaking because he understands if he opens his mouth, that is the end.
I made a connection between that scene because I noted, Saeed, he's Middle Eastern descent, and it immediately made me think of the photos that came out of Gitmo and the way sexual humiliation was used as a form of torture towards Iraqi prisoners. And that this is like, it is a form of dehumanization that is so built into the DNA of Western imperialism that there is no way to extract it. It's like if someone's DNA literally was cancer. Like, I can't remove the cancer because that's all that's there. And so it's, like I said, Kassiavitz has this really difficult task of balancing that level of just stark bleakness with these moments of beauty. So it's very clear that he's very intentional in the pace of the movie, that he's never going to drown you in the bleakness. He might bring you right to that moment where you feel like you're going to drown, and then he's going to find like an aside, a moment, a person that we can pull away from that's this like relief. And that's that Russian roulette effect, right? Where you're like, he can't keep doing this forever. Eventually the film has to end, and a movie like this is not going to have a happy ending.
Yeah.
Like, it's going to end with someone's going to die. At least one person's going to die, maybe more. I would say I give La Haine it literally is a perfect movie. I don't think they could have done anything about it to make it better. It is a masterpiece.
Yeah, because like there's no monologue where one of them has a conversation with Vince about like the differences of what they've gone through. They actually like don't even get to the point of being like, well, fuck you, Vince, I don't want to see you anymore. There's like this weird relief, but also like resentment. when they see each other. It's sort of like, oh, thank God you're okay, you're alive, and I'm glad that you came to pick me up. But you know what? Fuck you for having that white skin. Fuck you because like you would have been fine, but we just endured something that only the two of us will understand. And even then, Saeed still like does view himself a little bit more superior because he's brown and not black.
Well,
and it's unspoken.
It's a movie that when you think about this coming out in 1995, I cannot imagine what it must have been like to go into a theater and see a movie like this in like 95. Because I think it probably got compared a lot to Tarantino, but I would argue I don't think Tarantino's ever made a movie this good. It's better than any Tarantino movie I've ever seen.
Tarantino movie has gone into depths of
he's more a fantasist.
Like, yeah, about race. It's one thing for us to have
I mean Django Unchained, but that's like it's a fantasy.
But like again, like you said, it's a fantasy, but it's also like this thing of it being like they get to have their monologue. They get to have their moment.
It's an empowering film, and this film isn't. It's not disempowering. It's just very honest.
Yeah.
So would you recommend our audience, whoever out there, there's like 6-7 people that listen regularly, would you recommend they see La Haine?
It might seem like to your ears, you know, from our mouths that like we're making this seem like such a bleak movie.
It's a joyful movie.
It's a good movie that you're not going like it's not going to hurt as badly as it seems.
You're going to laugh your ass off. It's also like an incredibly funny movie.
Yeah, because they are, you know, they're 20-something guys. They're ridiculous. I don't think I've ever met a 20-something guy that I was just like I wasn't like you're so intelligent and wise. Most of the time, I'm like, you little dumb.
Yeah, it's they do
little dummy.
They do stupid things that are going to make you laugh. There are shots in this movie. There is a pull zoom shot where they're standing on a balcony in Paris that was like melting my brain when it was out because they just keep zooming and zooming and zooming. And if you don't know what a pull zoom is, you'll see it often in thrillers where they focus the lens while pulling the camera back, so it creates this weird distortion between figures in the foreground and the background. The background kind of like blurs out often, and it gives this weird vertigo-y kind of sense. And it's just like, I watched this scene, I'm like, what the hell?
Seth was like, that was a green screen, right? I'm like,
yeah.
No, it's not.
I thought it was digital or something. It took
him like a minute. He's like,
yeah, it's so good. But yeah, La Haine. It's not a great date night movie. It's not a movie you can sit around and like, you wouldn't watch this for the same reason you'd watch a Marvel movie. But if you want to watch a great fucking piece of cinema, La Haine. Well, before we go, of course, we're going to do our pop cult picks for this week. Ariana, what is something in pop culture that you want to recommend to our audience real quick?
Well, Boy Genius just released a new album called The Record. I really don't think they need more advertisement, but...
Who's Boy Genius? Is that a band?
It is a super group.
I have a feeling most people won't know who that is.
So it's Julian
Maybe I could be wrong.
Baker, Phoebe Bridgers, and Lucy Dacus. A lot of people know who they are.
I feel like Phoebe Bridgers, but like, a lot of people know who Lucy Dacus is?
I mean, my favorite thing is that Reductress on their Instagram was saying which one of the members of Three Genius were you going to invoice?
Of Boy Genius?
Of Boy Genius were you going to invoice for having hurt your feelings? And everybody was like, Lucy.
Who's the third person there?
Julian Baker. I referred to her album last time. You called it
Sad Lesbian Music. Yeah, Sad Lesbian Music. So yeah, if you want to listen to a sad lesbian supergroup, kind of.
I think it's one lesbian and 2 bisexuals, but
close enough. So I'm going to recommend The Worm and His Kings by Haley Piper. Now, this is book 1 in a series, and if you know anything about me, you know I hate book series.
Yeah, you do. Like Parables of the Soul has a great series, but you stuck with one book.
Well, no, I'll eventually read the next book in the Parable of the Sower series. But it's the kind of thing where like I feel like you don't have to read them all together. And I think this book will work that way for readers. Like I think you could read this book and then that's it, and you never have to pick anything else up. The Worm and His Kings, it's about a trans woman in New York City, and I feel like it's implied to be the 80s because there's some talk about like the AIDS crisis and things like that. And her partner, they're both homeless. They used to have a pretty nice life, but just circumstances because her partner came out. She was fired from her law firm. one thing led to another, and they ended up homeless, as the way it happens in America. Well, her partner's disappeared, and our main character has heard rumors that there is something that's kidnapping homeless people in the city. And so she stakes it out and finds out there is something kidnapping homeless people. And it leads her into this surreal Lovecraftian cult that's hiding beneath the city of New York City. And the ending is this mind-bending, psychedelic, like a consciousness leaving a body and moving through time. And there's like a time travel aspect to it where things that the cult worships, they don't realize they're actually putting into effect because something's going to happen that pulls it back into the past and becomes the thing that the cult worships in the first place. It's so good.
Literally became David Lynch.
Yeah. I didn't because I know David Lynch's cadence, and he would be like, and then there's a wind and a tree, and then you hear a bird, and there's a girl, and she's in the shadows. But it's, if you like Lovecraft and cosmic horror, but you want to read something that doesn't have the sort of rampant sexism and racism that an old Lovecraft story has, I would say The Worm and His Kings is a great book to check out. Well, that was the Pop Cult Podcast for this week. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure to check out the show notes for any links that are relevant, especially links to our blog, popcult.blog. We post on there every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and on the weekends. And there's a lot more movies, a lot more media that we review over there that we don't get to do here on the podcast. Wherever it is you listen to our podcast, we hope that you'll subscribe so that you're updated whenever new episodes drop. Coming up on the Pop Cult blog, we will be doing our German New Wave series, where we're going to be looking at some sort of core films from directors like Werner Herzog, Rainier Werner Fassbinder, and Wim Wenders, and more, including, we're going to finish off with Fitzcarraldo at the end of the month, which I've never seen before, and I'm looking forward to that. Along the way, we will be taking a break, and we'll do a week-long series about the short films of Ari Aster, as his new film, Beau is Afraid, is coming out. And it's a movie I'm very excited to get a chance to see at some point. If you enjoy what we do on popcult.blog and here on the Pop Cult Podcast, we would encourage you to think about supporting us on Patreon. We have many different reward levels. We have lots of different goals that we're trying to reach to kind of build our community up. With that said, I want to thank our patrons, Becca and Matt. They donate at the $10 Writers Room level. When you do that, one of the perks that you get is you get to pick a movie for me to review once a month. I know Matt had picked the SpongeBob SquarePants movies. He kind of gives me a list now because I have watched so many movies. He kind of shoots this list at me, and whatever's on there I haven't seen to pick that. And for some reason, the SpongeBob SquarePants review became very popular on the blog. And so those are just kind of fun reviews to do, kind of throwing a movie at me that doesn't go along with any of my series. It's always kind of a fun thing to do to change things up. Well, until next time, keep listening.